So I just want to read a few things for you guys. Again, thank you all for being here. This is a great turnout. Andrew's a great speaker, great friend, a great person. We're just glad to have him here. So I want to thank everybody here at the IU Luddy School for having us being put on. I want to thank Ball State, everybody associated with that. Travis, everybody putting that together. Also want to thank the MAS, the Media Arts and Science Program, through the HEC department. And of course, our wonderful friends at LIS, the Department of Library Informational Science. Thank you guys very much for all that you guys do. And of course, I want to thank our Marla, our Media Arts and Science Research Lab for Learning Arcade student group known as LORE. I want to thank everybody. It was a group effort to put this together, so thank you all very, very much. You guys were all wonderful. And then, so Andrew Borman. Who is Andrew Borman here? Andrew Borman is the Director of Digital Preservation at the Strong Museum of Play, where he coordinates the museum's efforts related to the preservation of electronic games. Thank goodness. We need that more than ever. He has long been an active participant in the field of game preservation with a specific focus on preserving unreleased game prototypes and development materials. He's also been involved in organizing and speaking at Thoroughbred Symposium known as Save the Games, which myself...
Next year!
What?
Comes back next year!
Yeah, next year! And Travis Haven and Jason and I went to that. It was a very good one. We got to talk. It was awesome to share in the love of preserving games and to advance the field of video game preservation. Prior to joining the Strong, he worked as a researcher and archivist at P2P Online, did I say it correctly? A website dedicated to the preservation of materials related to prototyping and again, also more unreleased game titles.
That's my thing.
What?
That's my thing.
That's his thing. Yeah. He shares insights and writes blog posts about the museum's video game collections and preservation work. And then he also holds an undergraduate and a master's degree in information science.
Woo!
Yeah, you go. Yeah. And has experience teaching library classes for students from kindergarten to 12th grade. He also serves as an adjunct lecturer at the University of Albany, and he does all this and more. So again, thank you guys. Let's get up for Andrew.
Awesome. Thank you for the great introduction. So I'm going to start off a little slow before we really get into it. There's a few things I'm going to read kind of word for word from this, and then we'll go into it. We'll have a lot of fun. And I will be available for questions afterwards until they pull me away and make me walk another 12 miles. So there's the joke. There's the joke. So yes, I am the Director of Digital Preservation. I've been at the Strong for 8 years. I taught for 3 years before that. Beyond the digital preservation side of things, I work on all sorts of exhibits, primarily the video game exhibits, but also increasingly on, because we're a museum of play, not a museum of video games, which we'll get into, exhibits about reading and being a good citizen, and all that comes with that. I do a lot of video presentations, but also video work in the museum itself, including I'll just see in a second, I don't want to spoil it, and then also on interactive, so ways of actually playing fun things at the museum. I do focus mostly on digital-born content, which includes newer games. I know we had some discussions earlier about mobile phone games. I wish I had perfect answers for all that, but I don't. That's why I'm still employed. But we're also focused on preserving the physical things that are in the collection, and also our library archive. So this is a picture of our oldest of our storage spaces, before we started to move a lot of the video games out of there. We get a taste for just some of that. All this to about here, and then all this over that way are just a fraction of the video games that we have. So I'm going to ask a rhetorical question I know the answer to. How many of you have been to Rochester and the Strong? So a couple extra. So exactly. I kind of knew the answer to that. So I'm going to read this word for word to make sure I don't get it wrong. So we are the Strong National Museum of Play. We're located in Rochester, New York. Do not go to New York City to get to us. You have about a 6-hour drive from there. Not a great time. And our mission is that we explore the ways in which play encourages learning, creativity, and discovery, and how it illuminates cultural history. We recognize that play has the power to teach. I mean, I'm here right now talking about the power of play, to spark imagination, and to create joy. Having some joy with your job and having fun, that's okay. Don't let your professors tell you otherwise. I've been to places like GDC talking to the industry, but it's really about people, and that's going to be a common theme today. So we are a collections-based museum. We're nearly 400,000 square feet. We win a lot of awards for being one of the best children's museums in the country. I hear there's one locally that's pretty darn good. Something like that. But really, we're more of a history museum. And at 400,000 square feet, that makes us one of the largest history museums in the United States. It just happens that we deal with things of play. And so we have over 550,000 objects, everything from the tiniest doll shoes to action figures, to board games, role-playing games. you name it, and of course, video games. And it is the world's most comprehensive collection of materials related to play. And yes, we have nearly 700,000 guests in 2024, which is a lot of people. So I think you should see the inside of the museum before you really get into the preservation things. So this is one of our new galleries that opened in 2023, and it's called Level Up. And this is more of a play-through learning experience. You go in there, you get a wristband, it tracks your progress, all inspired by our patent-pending periodic table of video game elements. So these are things like move, create, jump, run, feel. All those are achievements that you can earn by doing interactives inspired by video game history. So it's everything from a stealth zone where you can pretend that you're Solid Snake, watching out for the laser barriers, hiding from the camera, trying to go over a rock pit that makes a lot of noise. A more casual city sim game where you can just create your own create your own building and it comes to life in the city. Beat the Boss is a musical boss battle game. A dice rolling game or fighting against monsters. All things that you can do while you're also learning. But this is a very, very interactive exhibit. On the flip side is this. This is High Score, and this is also part of the expansion. And it's centered around our World Video Game Hall of Fame. What I love about the Hall of Fame is it's not about the best game in the world, but rather it's the games that are the most important, the ones that have longevity, that aren't just a flash in the pan and disappear. They're the games that have international reach. They're the most iconic games of all time. The big argument that I make, and nobody has listened to me so far with this one, but you can tell me I'm wrong, is that E.T. has a high level of consideration for the Hall of Fame. It wasn't a good game by most regards. I actually think it's not that bad. But it's one that's certainly iconic. It's one that's important. Maybe international reach, not quite as much. But it's one that I think should be in the Hall of Fame. It's also home to our Women in Games exhibit. Now, we started our Women in Games initiative actually before I was even at the museum. And like all these things, it starts as a collecting initiative. What can we find to uncover the stories of the women that were creating games that get overlooked because you hear about Shigeru Miyamoto or Will Wright, all of whom are great creators. But what about Evelyn Sito, who worked at Atari on doing the graphics for tons of games, including this painting of a Wonder Woman pinball game that never came out. So that's another thing that's happening. Now, we could have just had a case that the men of the world could walk by and ignore. Or we could have just integrated it within the exhibit itself. It also happened to be something that gets lost. Instead, we did both, and we created an app where you could actually follow in every single major case. There's some sort of Women in Games element in there. Obviously I'm biased, but it's remarkable. So some of the video work you can actually see in the background. There's an over 70-foot long digital timeline, about an hour and a half worth of content, 7 projector screens across. And that's all video capture that we do, and you'll see that in just a second because that is digital preservation. And if that wasn't enough, the world's largest Donkey Kong machine. So this is a view from the first floor, and you're looking up. It's over 20 feet tall. It uses a real Donkey Kong board. Now, there's no CRTs that were ever made that were that big, so there's certain concessions that have to be made. But it uses a real Donkey Kong board. It has wheels just like the real thing. There's a coin door, which you can kind of see behind things. The correct amount of speaker holes. What is the actual number? It varies depending on exactly when the Donkey Kong was made. We didn't put red paint under here for those that know Radar Scope story. But this had to be approved by Nintendo, or it was approved by Nintendo. So somewhere out there's a picture of me standing next to a giant screen in Atlanta, Georgia, that went off for Shigeru Miyamoto's approval. And so Miyamoto approves of me. Thank you. So why do we even care about video games in the first place? They're just video games. They're things that people play with. Well, we know that the impact of electronic games is huge. It's broad. They're rapidly evolving. They're a new form of play, at least when you consider, the whole history of play going back thousands of years. And they have a huge effect on how we play and how we learn and how we connect with each other. Looking back over COVID, I think most of us, even my parents, were playing some sort of video game because the world sucked, let's be honest. Video games are our culture. There is no ignoring the impact that Mario Brothers have had. Going back to the 90s, there were studies that showed that Mario was more popular than Mickey Mouse at the time. That's incredible. Mickey Mouse is still huge. And I think most importantly for me, this is the work that needs to happen now. I'm going to say something controversial. Paper is relatively easy to preserve, in the sense that there's been decades or perhaps hundreds of years worth of work to preserve it. Now that's not to discount the work that goes into it. It's really hard to preserve paper. But if you store paper well, you store it in the right conditions, it's going to survive essentially forever, especially with proper conservation treatment. You throw a floppy disk in a shelf, you store it in great conditions. The estimated lifespan of a floppy disk is about 30 years. Do the math, that takes you back to 1995. Now that doesn't mean that they've all stopped working. A lot of them still work. But that was what they estimated. Now do that over the next 100 years. And that's really the time span that we're thinking about. How are we going to be able to access these games 100 years from now? Preservation isn't an accident. Just because a painting was stored in an attic doesn't mean that it was preserved. It just happened to survive. You do the same thing with a floppy disk, it's not going to survive. You're going to have a hunk of plastic at best, but it turns out plastic doesn't like to be saved either, so you probably won't even have that. You might have the paper label if the glue hasn't destroyed it in the meantime. But luckily, the question of why preserve games, I do feel like that's being asked less and less over time. I think that's a really good thing, but it also highlights that a lot of work needs to be done. So I want to talk about some misconceptions about preservation. Games cannot be preserved, past tense. If you go on Blue Sky, if you go on Twitter, I'm going to call it Twitter, you will see a lot of people out there that say, I preserved this thing. So you're done? We know that's not true. That work never ends. That work has to go on for not just now, but 100 years from now, 1,000 years into the future. If you want to play Super Mario Brothers, and if somebody 1,000 years from now can play Super Mario Brothers, that means somebody's been doing that job starting today, or really years ago. Old retail games are the most that are at the most risk. That's certainly true. Old floppy disk games that I just highlighted, those are at risk. I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say everything's great with the floppy disk. It's not. But when you pick up a cell phone or you go to buy a new one, what's one of the first things you do? You delete everything off of it. You trade it in. Maybe you sell it. Maybe it gets stuck in a drawer. We've already highlighted why that's not preservation. Add a highly flammable battery on top of that. I recommend not putting a battery in a drawer for decades. But those games that are being digitally distributed today are just as at risk, if not more. I can still go to eBay and buy a floppy disk from the 80s, and most likely it'll either work or I can find a copy that works. I can't go back to these digital storefronts to get that content back. So that really highlights that the new games are at risk. And then the last one, the one that I get the most hate over, is or people say, if it's not on the internet, it's not preserved. That's not true. I compare video game preservation to an iceberg. That's why there's this image of an iceberg. Everything above the water, that's the stuff that is publicly available. Those are the games you can go out and buy. Those are the magazines, those are the books. That's all that comes with video games. Sometimes there's leaked stuff. Sometimes there's stuff from the games press who got really interesting early copies of games. That's cool. But all below the water is everything else that's made in the game development process. Those are the source code. Those are the early builds. Those are the communications, and I'm going to show you some of the examples of those. All that stuff is really kept private by most of the companies or individuals that work on the game. And it will never be available in the public if we just assume that it needs to be on the internet. Instead, I see an R roll up to Strong. And again, the Strong is just one model for video game preservation. By all means, do something else if you're doing something. That's great. But I see us being here on a boat, trying to fish down under the water and get some of that content that the game developers have kept private for 50 years sometimes, and make it just a little bit more public. Is it inconvenient to come to Rochester sometimes? Yeah, but you can drive. Exactly. And in the summertime, it's not bad. Just like you, we got snow a few days ago, so maybe, I don't blame you if you want to wait until summertime. But by being able to do that, we're going to be able to preserve the most complete picture of what video game history is. And we just can't rely on the internet to do it. Preservation is an active thing. What happens if the Internet Archive gets sued? That's never happened before. I say that because they're my friends and I care about them deeply. I love, the Wayback Machine. But preservation is an active thing that somebody has to do, and it requires resources to do that. So this is our approach to video game preservation. If you're going to preserve video games, you need video games. That makes sense. Of those 515,000 objects, I'm going to move around just to mess with the camera a little bit. We have about 65,000 video game related artifacts. The large majority of those are the games and the hardware. But there's also things, because we're a museum of play, there's action figures, there's board games that are related to electronic games, as we call it. On the next circle, the producers. This is all that behind the scenes documentation that most of them don't want you to see. So we work not only with individuals like Carol Shaw, who created River Raid, one of the most pioneering games developed by a woman back in the 80s. Will Wright, who made The Sims. Actually, I should have put it up here. We are doing our annual Women in Games event actually tonight, but we had some notebooks out of just showing the collections that we have. And my favorite page from Will Wright's notebooks that we have at the Strong was on display, where he's going down the list deciding what's going to be a career in The Sims. Politician, garbage man, whatever they were. And then towards the bottom of the list, serial killer, question mark? That's the only thing. Unless you have a time machine, there's no better log of how games are made than having the materials from the developers themselves. I think it's funny, but then, think about all the research that you can do around that one sentence. Beyond that, though, we're looking at the player. We realize that video games are meant to be played, and that's a really important part of it. Being a casual player or being a kid that's playing games is different than a speedrunner, which is different than a streamer, which is different than an esports player. All those different things, we need to find ways of documenting it. My colleague JP, who runs our International Center for the History of Electronic Games, which is what we call our video game branch at the museum, he compares it to preserving a game of baseball, or maybe sports ball stadium, like we saw earlier. In the sense that, as far as I know, there are no reenactments of a World Series game from the 1920s, like there was Civil War battles. So what else do you do with baseball? You preserve video, you preserve some of the uniforms, maybe a seat from the stadium, pictures of the hot dog prices that day, all these other things. And yet, you don't need to necessarily preserve the playable thing. Now, of course, my goal is to preserve the playable thing as much as humanly possible. But what else do you need to do to be able to capture the full picture of video game history? It's all that stuff, and then some. And then because we're a museum of play, we are looking at it through that lens of play. There are other video game museums out there. Some of them do really amazing work, especially some of the ones that are overseas that are focused on their local history. Again, you don't need to be the Strong. But we're looking at it through that lens of play, so you can trace, let's see, Baldur's Gate 3, anybody play that? Really popular game. You could go to Strong, you could play that game. You can look at Neverwinter Nights, which was the first graphical, massively multiplayer game. We have material from Don Daglow, who founded Stormfront Studios and worked out in his early AOL games. Then you go back to, the first edition's Dungeons and Dragons, and look at that. Or you could even look at material that showed how a school teacher, I think he was a librarian, actually used that first edition of Dungeons and Dragons in his classroom. We have those materials too. And then you can go back further. How were kids playing with fantasy going back hundreds of years? It's a one-stop shop for all of those things, because that stuff matters. And it really isn't until more recently that you see games like Stardew Valley being inspired by Harvest Moon, so video games inspired by video games, which is still super valuable, but if you want to look at what Harvest Moon was inspired by, you need all this other stuff. So, video games. I figured I'd show you a few video games. On the left-hand side, the company collection from Broderbund, which was a publisher back in the 80s and 90s. They made published Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego. So we have a copy of all of those for all the different computers and all the languages. And this actually bleeds over to our archives, but we can also show you how Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego was made. On the right-hand side, the Blizzard fans. Basically, this came from Paul Sams, who was COO of Blizzard for many years. And he had copies of all the games he worked on, again, in all the languages. We have all those. And then you can really start to explore how are these games localized? What different stories can you tell with having all these different versions of the game? And that's just, 2 bays of shelves. Imagine what else there is. So I'm here to talk about digital preservation. I know that a lot of you are working hands-on, whether it's at Marla or wherever, getting hands-on with all the stuff. Some of this is going to be familiar. I talked about the applesauce, which is on the left-hand side, quite a bit at lunch today. You'll see a picture down here, which you'll see again, floppy disk. So let's dive into some of the specifics of digital preservation. So hopefully you come away with something that is useful for you rather than just me talking all the time. So how do we prioritize what we digitize? I would love to say that we've digitized every single game in the collection. I'd be a liar. I'm not lying about that today anyway. So we have the system that we came up with called RAVE, and it stands for rare, at risk, valuable, and engaging. So rare, things that are one of a kind. Obviously, that means we should prioritize digitizing those things. If I can't go to eBay and buy another copy, it's probably worth spending some time digitizing it. At risk, all those floppy disk games, yeah, we should start focusing on those. Those digital games, yeah, we need to be proactive in digitizing those things now. Valuable, sometimes it's monetarily, but that's not really what we mean. Valuable is more valuable to researchers or people at the museum. So I often use the example of Super Mario Brothers a lot. It's not a rare game. It's not at risk, but it's definitely valuable to video game culture. And then the last one is engaging. If you're gonna exhibit Nintendo games, you kind of need to have Super Mario Brothers. And with that, I point to the picture in the upper right-hand side. That's Super Mario Brothers 3. But it's not the one that you've ever played before. I know because there's only 2 other copies of that in the world. And that was made by John Romero and the people that would become id Software. They're calling themselves Ideas for the Deep. They pitched a PC version of Super Mario Brothers 3 to Nintendo. And they would be turned down for that. But it showed that smooth scrolling could be done on the PC. They'd go on to make PC games with smooth scrolling. So that screenshot alone shows the inception of one of the biggest video game companies of all time. Just a few years before they made a game called Doom. Bottom left-hand side, though, I wanted to point out this memo from SSI, Strategic Simulations. I saw some of those games upstairs as well. It says, okay, men, I realize that sweat is a sign of manhood, but you're overdoing it a bit. Basically it says, please shower, please wear deodorant, and dress in clean clothes, with clean being underlined. So this is coming from one of the secretaries, I believe, at SSI. So you're getting to see company culture as much as anything. And then there's some tapes on the right-hand side, and I will talk about those in just a little bit. So a lot of what we do, though, is build capacity to do. So I already told you, we don't digitize everything. I wish we could, but it means we're dealing a lot with the archival material that we have. So we started a floppy disk digitization project. This actually started right after I joined the museum, so before the applesauce tool that I hinted at earlier was made. And we aimed to digitize 100 floppy disks. We ended up doing close to 2,000 disks over the course of a few months. Are they all perfect? No, I'm going to be honest. Not everything is perfect. I don't have a time machine to go back to the 80s to be able to recover that data perfectly. If you have a time machine, feel free to pull me aside afterwards, or better yet, you can pull me aside before this meeting, and we can talk about your time machine. But we're able to do that. And now, because we preserve things physically as well, we've stored those disks in a good location, we can go back with better tools to pick up some of that data that we missed or don't think were ideal at the time. Or we could digitize Umatic video. This was another project. Umatic, if you've never seen it, is a video format often used in professional environments. We have hundreds of them from both Atari and Midway, just to name a few companies. And so we were able to digitize over 200 hours of video. Really, the biggest thing with that, it's all real time. The videos are really large. But I want to show this video. And this is actually from Atari, I think in 1984 thereabouts, showing the PCBs being made, showing their lunch room, and then showing a bit of joking around in the company culture with somebody pretending to work. Not that any of us would do that. So again, unless you have a time machine, this sort of video is so key to understanding what Atari was beyond the games themselves. I actually have another video from one of our arcade collections. What was it like to be in an arcade? I mean, how many of you have actually visited a real arcade in the past 5 years? Yeah, exactly. Now, there are some around, but I guarantee you, they aren't what they were back in the day. Look at this audience that showed up to play some of the new games of the time. Just seeing how people come, seeing how they interact in this environment. The lines of machines, Centipede was relatively new, so you saw multiple of them. And what they're actually looking at was, the player reaction and how they were playing the games themselves. But then Atari and Midway go back and use this to make better games. So this sort of video is super valuable to researchers. Because trust me, going to Round One or Dave & Buster's or even your local barcade, that's not the same as going to an arcade back then. I say as if I was there, I was not. I remember Street Fighter 2 though, so that's good enough. Look at those reactions. Or to do a little bit of company culture, this one hopefully we have audio for. So Atari, a very big company at the time, they had a lot of money coming in. This video is from their 10th celebration, so just 10 years into Atari. That puts you, I think it was in 1982, 1983, just before the North American video game crash. I want you to see what this company was like putting on shows for their employees.
Lydia Gable just got the first.
Oh, hold on. Oh, that might just be coming up. Or it could be a different video. Anyway,
Lydia
this
Gable
was actually
just got the
exciting. Never
first
mind.
Cincinnati Man
But this is
design.
showing a commercial
Then
for,
Amy Weber got the new Queasy Big Microwave. Again, Julie Costanzo got a Sega Genesis system. However, you can play games like Sonic and Knuckles, Echo Tides of Time, and Disney's Aladdin. Sue Dunn just got the Squawk 2000.
Pioneered that project.
Yes, right. The Sega Genesis system, game sold separately.
Well, pretty neat though. Hopefully that Atari video shows up. I can't remember. There's a lot of videos. I can show it to you afterwards. So one of the other things we do though is we do video capture. This started way back in time before I was there in 2011, knowing that someday the hardware will fail. That's inevitable. It sucks, but it's true. And so they set out to capture as many games as they possibly could over a course of, I believe, 5 years. And in doing so, they got thousands of games captured. Do they look as good as what we could do nowadays? No, with the fancy upscalers, RGB mods, all that stuff. But these videos are going to become increasingly valuable over time as you want, whether you're an author of an emulator, we can talk about that, or if you just want to see what the game was like on real hardware, that's going to become more and more valuable over time. And by the way, YouTube is not a preservation platform. It's an ad platform that serves you videos. Don't forget that. Emulation. So I did put this in here. Emulation is a tool. Most people who come to do research at the museum, they don't want to emulate. They want to play on the real thing. I think that's really important. But there's ways of using emulation, again, that aren't just for piracy. We can create something like this that uses the same, I think, as emulation station front end that you can go download and put on a Raspberry Pi today, freely available. Just what you do to get the games on there is up to you. But what we did, along with an intern that I worked with, was we changed the front end to instead of be about the system. Normally, you click, oh, I want to play an Atari game, I want to play an NES game. That's cool. Instead, we put the woman front and center. So you're able to see games by Donna Bailey, Denise Hendricks, Carol Shaw, others. And then when you click on that, yes, you're selecting a game to play, but you're learning about what their contribution was to that game. So you can use emulation to create something transformative. This is something that I would love to see more people doing, because I think emulation is an amazing tool. And by the way, MAME, which started as an arcade emulator. Again, you can use it to pirate things. I'm not the police, so you do you. But it's seriously one of the best documentation projects of all time in all of video games. Because someday that emulator is going to stop working because somebody has stopped updating it. The hardware will be dead. But you'll have all the documentation for how they originally got it to work. And someday that will be more valuable than the emulator itself. Arcade preservation. There's lots of things we could do here. We could 3D model things. This is actually from a 3D scan, so we could print new parts for arcade machines. Surprisingly, there are arcade games with film in them. And this should be a clip of that, hopefully. So there's actually trivia questions. So even though you don't consider film to be a playable thing, that was a real thing. And this is a video you can watch that I made on YouTube. You can see our arcade conservation lab. This was before the expansion opened. And actually, here's the game that motorcycle bit would go into. So we're doing all these things and trying to find ways of making these playable for the public. So almost every arcade machine in the museum, we have over 400 arcade and pinball machines. Not all of them are out for play. They are museum artifacts though, and we consider them use-effects. So think about all the hacks that were done to keep this game going back in the day. We have a full-time conservator on staff that can work on a $20 million painting, or she could paint the side art to one of these cabinets. And then we have a full-time arcade conservation technician that works just on the arcade and pinball machines to keep them going. All this documented much in the same way you would a $20 million painting. Yes, we're not going to save every little light bulb that goes out. We're going to know what kind it was that was in there, and make sure whatever we're putting in there is representative of what it can be. I got the opportunity to build a new lab a few years ago, which was really exciting. This was made possible due to a Rochester grant organization called the Killian Schmidt Foundation. And so in the past, we used to have researchers who wanted to come play games, or I would want to sit down and play something for some exhibits use. I'd go out to the shelf, pull a PlayStation or Nintendo off the shelf, hope that it worked. If it didn't work for some reason, that's a lot of paperwork, so that sucked. Instead, we're able to build out this lab that has lab use only consoles. And I've been able to form a collection of just those things. So in here are all the tools that I need to preserve most of the most popular formats. And I'm going to show you a couple of those. I'm trying to be conscious of the time. We're still good. But all the tools to back up a CD, to back up a floppy disk, to back up basically any sort of cartridge format you can imagine, with a few exceptions still. They all go, and it's hard to see behind it, but there's a nice OLED TV to the top. Right next to it, under the word lab, is a nice Sony PVM, which is a broadcast monitor, super high quality. You could have another screen in the back, another screen in there. My computer over here can do video capture. You could route all those things to the same thing, so you have, Sonic playing on all the screens through upscalers to get the best video quality out. Or you could have Sonic on just, the two monitors that are side by side. See what it looks like on a CRT, see what it looks like on a new TV, so you can analyze what's different about them. Or you have Sonic there, you could have Sonic Frontiers there, you could have Sonic CD in the back, any number of possible combinations. And all of that available just through a series of switches like the switches over here, and allows you to instantly be up and running. And so along with that, you can see nice camera equipment for streams that I haven't started to do again, CD drives, more TVs, more NESs, all the stuff we need to actually make these things accessible. So with over 550,000 objects, only a fraction will ever go out on display. But you're able to go to our website and actually, request to play some of these games. It's free. You just have to come to Rochester, so we'll get into that. And there are many formats and many things. These are all from the same collection. They're slides that I used for Save the Games last year. All those CDs to the left are from Volition. Hundreds, thousands of CDs. When Volition shut down, they made the game Descent. Well, Parallax did. They became Volition and Outrage and all that stuff. They made Red Faction. They made Summoner. They made Saints Row. We have literally thousands of CDs that they gave us when they shut down. And so I'll digitize most of them, and I'll show you how. We also have weird formats. Pinnacle Micro, which is essentially like a hard drive in a 5 1/4 inch size thing. Turns out they're relatively easy to digitize, but one of them didn't work really, unfortunately. And then lots of different tape formats. If you've never seen a data tape before, this is not an audio cassette. They hold data, and they hold a lot of data for the time. They are some of the best resources for video game history, because not only do they have server backups, we would often catch elements of what was on a individual person's computer at the time. So things that never made it into the game, things you probably don't want to see, a little bit of everything. But again, it's showing those things that would otherwise not be captured in like a source repository for those of you that know coding nowadays. If you don't commit it back to it, you never see it, except they get captured in tapes like these. This device. This is the Sani open source cart reader. You can go out, you can build one of these yourself. Again, what you do with it after that, that's up to you. Built in, you could do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 formats, plus Game Boy and Game Boy Advance is on one of the sides. You stick an SD card in it, you put the cartridge in it, hit a couple buttons, and you get a backup of the game. It looks something like this. So I put a game. Oh, that's got my audio on. I meant to get rid of that. That's for my lecture. We don't need that audio. Let me turn that off. So you're going through, you're selecting the actual cartridge. In this case, Awesome Possum. You hit a few buttons. You hit read ROM. You give it a second. It'll give you a progress bar. Now, it's not always that easy, but one of the goals too is to do as little harm as possible. You could take this cartridge apart and read the ROM chips directly, but then you need to desolder them, you need to pop them off. That's a potential issue. So this is a way of doing it. You can actually see it because it knows this is a retail game, that it checks out okay, and it just works. That's how easy video game preservation can be. Again, it's not always that easy, but it can be that easy. Then you can reset it, choose another game, and go on. Now, how do you verify it? That's a terrible video on my screen, which is dirty. But I've loaded this into my computer, just a Mac, and you can see my reflection. And just like that, you can load it in an emulator. Literally just drag and drop, and it works that easy. There's no reason why other people can't be doing this. So floppy disk, here's our Apple Drive. Apple drives are known for being fairly unique because they didn't use the same sort of sector layouts that PC drives would. And so this turns out your computers nowadays, they don't like floppy disks. Actually, Windows will, but again, different story. So this one will interface with this white box that's in the back. It's called the applesauce. And I know there's one floating around campus because I heard about that today. And you can see I keep it apart so that I can clean it whenever I need to. And that will read the actual magnetic fluctuations off the disk. It's not really worried about what sort of files are on it. Instead, it's just going to read the disk like it was. And in fact, this one has a special sensor built in. So not only can it do that, but it can tell you exactly where that data is supposed to be on the disk. Why is that important? Because Apple games in particular use some really fancy copyright protections. So you could digitize this with some other tools. They've existed back since the 80s. We have some of them at the museum. But in order to actually get them to work, you'd have to crack them in some way, hack the digital rights management software away, and hope that it still functions like it's supposed to. With this, if it's done its job properly, you'll get as close to a one-to-one image of what that disk is, complete with the copyright protection. It won't know you made a copy. So by all means, copy that floppy. And this is what it actually looks like. This is the layout in a PNG graphic format. So you can see where there's data, kind of where there's not. Doesn't mean a whole lot looking at it. But you can find all sorts of cool stuff. So this is, we actually talked about this earlier at lunch. This is the earliest known prototype of Age of Empires, what is called Dawn of Man. This is a real life example of something we digitized during that floppy disk project. It looks almost nothing like the final game. It has all these features that aren't in it. It actually predates, there's a making of video of Age of Empires on YouTube. This predates that. I don't know by how long, but this is the earliest known surviving copy that even Microsoft and Ensemble Studios didn't have anymore. So it's a really, really cool example, and that's just on one floppy disk. Imagine what was on the other 2,000 of them. This is our CD reader. It's a robot. It's called NIMBY. This is something you can go out and buy. It's a few $100s. I'll give the warning. You know, if you've ever bought CDRs, again, I'm talking to the older folk in here, sorry, like me. At the bottom of all those would be a clear plastic disc that's meant to make sure that your bottom disc doesn't get scratched. Do not put it in there. It jams the drive because it's like, oh, there's no disc in there. I'm going to load another disc in there. Oh, something's wrong. I'm going to load another disc instead of ejecting it. No good things happen from that. The other warning is that this, because of the software that's available right now with it, there are kind of some open source tools that are potentially in development. It can only use certain tools to back up CDs. And so to go back to the copyright protection thing, a lot of those tools don't do a good job of actually making a proper copy that keeps that copyright protection intact. So I don't recommend using it for retail games unless you know it doesn't have copyright protection. But with those Volition collections that I talked about earlier, over 4,000 discs were digitized through this one machine. All you do is you load a spindle of discs, and then if it's successful, it drops down into an empty holder for discs. If it wasn't successful, it poops them down the bottom and tells you there's an error. But you could leave this running. You could load 50 or 100 discs, and it'll just go. If there's an error, you'll know it, and you can turn on logging and all that stuff. And if they're successful, it goes the other way. And so you could do this while you're doing other things. If I had to do all these discs by hand, it would have taken me years. I'd still be going. And I'm almost done with this project, mostly because I haven't touched it recently. But I digitized thousands of discs over the course of a few months. So this is just a quick video of looking at it. There's basically a normal CD drive in there. I have some other ideas to actually how to make it better. I just haven't done them yet. Yeah, you can see there's just a CD drive. Just a robot, no big deal. And on those were things like this. This is an unreleased game that never came out from Volition called Underground. They showed a quick clip of this back in the day on a Game Informer video. And this is one of the last versions of the game that was made. And it's kind of cool, but because there are thousands of discs, we could skip back in time, like we have a time machine, again, if you have them, let me know. And this is an earlier version of Underground that looks completely different. Now, this game was canceled about 2003, and then the next game that they work on was Saints Row. You can kind of see the bones of Saints Row in this early game that never came out. As far as I know, nobody has ever seen. Yeah, you can tell I was having some issues. Nobody's ever seen that particular version of the game before. So that's just for all of you and all however many of you are online. But it turns out they didn't stop with Underground, at least not immediately. They put a little bit more work into it. Oh man, that's not what's next. I messed up the order. Okay, there's a lot of videos, like I said. So instead, we're actually looking at Descent. So in the bottom right-hand corner is the cutscene from Descent, about the size that it would have been relative to this other thing. It doesn't look 100% right, but as a proof of concept, I was able to coding unavailable. I was able to re-render the cutscene in 4K. All right, taking us from basically 320 pixels wide to close to 4,000 pixels wide. You can see I'm missing a few things, but I haven't tracked it all down. But earlier, somebody was asking me about the tools of video game preservation. I mentioned 3D Studio. This actually used 3D Studio 4 before it was Max. So it doesn't look quite right. But those sorts of tools are super valuable in actually providing access to all these things. And we do have a digital asset management system. Quite honestly, most of the stuff has to be accessed in Rochester because most of it is so new, we don't have the copyright for it. But there are things like this that you can go onto our site right now. 1899, George S. Parker. This is one of the Parker brothers. You can go read his diaries, multiple years of his diaries, and look through it. Multiple years of one of the most important board game manufacturers of all time. We also see things like this that were pulled off of an old Atari mainframe. Did you know that Atari almost manufactured the Nintendo Entertainment System in the United States?
Oh, yeah.
My friend Frank from the Video Game History Foundation just did a video or a panel about this a few weeks ago. But we have actual documentation showing them considering manufacturing the NES. Imagine how different of a world it would have been if Atari made Nintendo. And basically at the end of it, at least one of the people said, yeah, we should do this. They didn't do that. And talking about more access of files, I talked about earlier the RAD graphic format, which is a format that Atari made themselves. Turns out if you're a video game technology company like Atari was, you're pioneering tons of technology. So the game we digitized, Awesome Possum, that's a sprite from an early version of the game that only exists on these obscure graphics formats that we've been able to access because of the digital preservation work that we've done. So if you look up Awesome Possum, he doesn't look that awesome. Cyberstorm is actually a prototype unreleased game, common story here, that never came out. And so we have one of the few cabinets that exist in the world, and it looks like the image on the left. But then, because of the RAD graphics format, we can go back in time and look at some of the earlier graphics that nobody has ever seen before. Or we could look at, again, more Atari stuff, a Police Academy game that never came out. And it looks something like that. This shows up in a few screenshots in a magazine, but until I was able to get this to work, nobody knew it still existed. All because of the digital preservation work that we do. And if you want to come to our library, this is our library reading room. You can see one of our archivists. Then we have actual researchers doing stuff. You can see brown boxes, telltale sign of a good archive, where it's all controlled access. So you can look at any of those things I mentioned, and then some that are in physical format. If you want to look at toys, dolls, board games, we can bring those up for you to look at as well. And of course, if you want to play games, you let me know and we can set up in the lab and you have a chance to actually play the games. Again, I realize Rochester could be far away. For those of you that are doing research, or if you're just interested, know that you don't need to be working on a book or a dissertation or something like that to actually get access. Access is free if you can make it. And we've had people work on books, dissertations. Those are great. We've had YouTubers come who want to look at video game history. Great. We've also had super fans come. We've had a father and son combo come look at our Skylanders collection. Great. As long as you're willing to follow access rules in our archive, by all means, come. We want to see you there. And if it's so difficult and you have a really pressing topic, there's a number of different research fellowships available on our website where we pay you up to $750 a week to come to Rochester. I guarantee it's probably cheaper than coming down here is. And there's actually a hotel literally right across from the museum that we can get a good deal at. So you can come do research. Yes, they're competitive, particularly if you come over the summer where, all the professors are, looking for something fun to do, come to Rochester. But we pay you $750 a week to come do research. Library, 235,000 volumes. I'm conscious of the time. Books about games, strategy guides, plenty of that stuff. AI, I'm not going to talk about it a lot. I like it. Museums deal with truth. I've played with it to make cool tools that help us access it. But honestly, if I could, I'd just pay a coder to do this. It took me like a whole day to make this tool. Really cool. And you can see actually the contents of some of those disks that I digitized. And I can open up the disk. Neat, but I'd rather just pay somebody to do it. So I don't think about AI too much.
Less environmentally destructive.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to talk about this. This does not impact my job at all. Preservation, falls under fair use for museums, libraries, and archives. By all means, your institution is going to be the one that controls exactly what you can do. But this solely had to deal with remote access. And do I think that's important? Yes. If you go and read the documents submitted by the Software Preservation Network, I'm in there saying why I think it's important to provide remote access someday. And it's really about providing equitable access. I realize as students, you can't just pick up and leave and come to Rochester every time you want to look at something. I do think there's a future for that. I don't know what it looks like. Quite honestly, until it's allowed, I'm not going to spend a lot of time thinking about it because why? Why waste my time? But I think there is a future where video games are accessible remotely in a way that isn't just on the Internet Archive. Again, I love you all. So the thing to keep in mind, no matter what you're doing in digital preservation, keep your audience in mind. Know your users, know your staff, know your outside researchers. Who will access it? That will help define everything else that you do. If you wanted to come do research in Rochester, you need to be able to find the stuff you want to look at. So we cater a lot towards all of you. Decide, does it need to be accessible 24/7? Can only staff access it? Can some of it be stored in cold storage? So the idea being it's cheaper, but it takes longer to access if something goes wrong. All things you could think about. You'll hear about that in your library class, your archives classes. But I wanted to mention it. And with that, I was asked to put a QR code at the end. I apologize for not having some videos in that are moved out last minute, but I can show those to you. Some of those will be in the presentation tomorrow at BSU. So that's me.
I know we have some time for questions.
Thank you so much, Andrew. All right, how much time do we have for questions, Ross?
11.
11. We have 11 minutes. Okay, all right.
I can talk quick.
Okay, questions.
Kelly had a
I'll
question.
let you choose. Andy.
Well, yeah, I know,
But
I know you were saying don't think much, but like going back to school was like I want to make money, so well, how do you see future impact in it? You have to think, like the video game industry.
yeah, I mean, we continually work with the game industry. So we're able to talk to Microsoft and all those and get them to buy into the work that we're doing. We're able to think about technologies. As much as I didn't love Google Stadia when I saw it at GDC all those years ago, I think the idea of cloud streaming a game is a way of keeping a game secure. If that technology was suddenly available to me to provide you access to, I don't know, Police Academy, why wouldn't I use that? But realistically, a lot of that's going to have to come with cooperation from the industry. And I think everything we do, there needs to be cooperation. So long, piracy has dominated the video game preservation community. Again, I'm not going to discount them. Those tools I showed you, you can use those for piracy. But at the same time, going back to my iceberg, if that's the only thing you have access to, game history is going to be bland. You're going to get these boring books that tell the same stories 12 different ways. Who cares? So let's find new ways, tread new ground. And if you want to do your own thing, by all means. But let's find something new to do that's going to provide a better picture. So, I look at emulation as being a key tool for remote access. But I also hope by working with organizations like the ESA that we're able to find creative ways that the industry supports that also isn't hampering our goal, because ultimately we're going to be some of the ones that are drawing it. I assume we have an online.
Yeah, online question. You mentioned the museum deals with board games as well.
Yep.
Do you have any comments on the dangerous preservation created by the small batch crowdfunding by which many modern board
Sure.
games are produced?
Again, our goal is not to preserve every plaything ever made. It's impossible. We're going to have representative samples. We have some of those Kickstarter games. That's not a new thing. The idea of small batch games goes back into the 50s and 60s. A lot of war games and expansion packs were mail order only, or maybe 10 of them were ever made. That's not a new idea. So I am not the board game expert. We have a curator that's really good at that. We have thousands of board games. I guarantee you we have representation, not just that, but also how some of those board games were made. To give one really concrete example before we get to the next question, if any of you have ever played Settlers of Catan, or Catan, however you want to say it, the Bromleys and Mayfair Games brought that game to the United States for the first time, I think back in the 80s. We have the collection from the Bromleys of that process and of every other game that Mayfair Games made. And because they just love board games, that's why they got into it. There are thousands of games just from them. Add in our Rio Grande collection, the Hendrix collection. We have so many board games. And yes, jigsaw puzzles. Do you want to draw a line between those? Please, come. That'd be fun. Yeah.
I have my own just small video game collection,
Yeah.
physical media. Does the Strong have online resources that describe best like personal preservation practices to keep your own stuff?
The best resource we have is if you Google search the Strong Digital Preservation Handbook. We created a handbook that goes into some of those details. It's going to be updated at some point. It's a few years out of date. But at the very least, it's going to show you some of the initial thoughts that we have on, because it was written a few years ago, on some of that work. So it's a good place to start. And again, this is actually a place where I point to hobbyist communities like Redump, who writes all these amazing guides. Are they perfect for every use? No. But fan communities are going to know more about whatever your favorite video game console is than I ever will. I bring that librarian approach to things. So don't be afraid of Googling while Google still works.
Are there any initiatives currently in place focusing on social justice in the gaming industry?
Absolutely. We collect all around that. Everything from protests that have happened over the years, how games have been used, things like Gamergate. Absolutely things that we collect around. Again, if there's something that we're missing, let me know and we can go out and find it. But all those social movements, thinking about violence in games, going back to the Senate hearings in the 1990s. All right, that's great, but because we're not a video game museum, you can also go look at the Comic Code. You can probably find elements in our collection talking about how jazz music is the devil. All those things, and I know that's a little bit different than social justice, but I think it all ties together in a really interesting way.
So I'm more familiar with like traditional archives and rare books libraries. And something that kind of goes on more in there is when authors or other influential people die, they'll often put in their will that they want their papers to go wherever. Kind of in your presentation, you brought up the Volition collection, which it seemed like, maybe I'm wrong, but it seemed like you were only able to get that once
they
died.
Now, what's interesting about that one was I actually talked to them before I was at the museum back in 2016, so about a year before I was there, about helping them digitize things. And actually with Saints Row, they had a PSP version that didn't come out. That's online because I was able to tell them how to modify it. But actually, yeah, we do similar things because we are a special archive, collection, library, whatever you want to call us. So our library is actually named after Brian Sutton Smith, who is kind of the biggest play scholar of all time. So we have all of his books with the annotations, and he actually kept detailed journals that he'd go back and create indexes for. That I believe they've digitized, and you can go and look at those online in one of our projects. So I mean that sort of thing happens a lot, but we do actively work with, and I apologize for cutting you off, just trying to be quick. But we do work with companies while they're still around. We work with Activision and Toys for Bob, Preserve Skylanders, Microsoft has sent us stuff, Nintendo has sent us stuff. Maybe not all things you want to see, but it's something. And increasingly we're working with developers now while they're still working on the game, rather than trying to pick up the scraps afterwards. I hope that covers everything you would have asked.
Yeah, basically I was just asking how it comes to you. And
yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Nowadays a lot of them reach out to us.
Okay.
In the past, we've been collecting video games 20 years as of next year. It was a lot more work of like, hey, we're in Rochester, we're a museum, blah, blah, blah. But now a lot more contact us. And it's more complicated than that, but yeah. I'm gonna go behind you first. Yeah.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know you started working with the Strong long after they were established. So
Yep.
I'm just wondering what made you want to join them, or what interested you about them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what drew me away from teaching, especially because I was on a tenure track position as a school librarian, was the fact that it's sustainable. That I knew when I went there and I saw what they were doing, that it wasn't going to be gone the next day. If you look up online, museum going out of business. There's been a lot of places, collectors largely, who tried to make a video game museum. Then they go out of business and it all disappears. It gets eBayed. It goes off in the wind. And unfortunately, a lot of those early efforts had the support of game developers. So really great material disappeared. And that was always my concern. But when I saw the Strong's position, I saw that, unlike other museums, they were focused on long term. They were focused on 100 years. And I could get into the history of the museum, but I'll just say our founder, who passed away in the 60s, the museum would open 20 years later, was the single largest shareholder in Kodak back in the 60s. And Kodak is a Rochester company. So there is money. During COVID, yeah, we lost a few positions, and that was awful. And obviously everything that happened with that was awful. But the museum wasn't going anywhere. And that's when I knew that I would put my efforts behind Strong rather than just a YouTube channel, because I knew it would survive long after I'm gone. Hopefully I'll be here 1,000 years from now, but we'll see. Let's go to the online question.
You mentioned using video game RGB mods and
Yep.
upscalers. Do you ever contract these developers, like possibly Mike G with
Yep.
RetroTink to help develop custom upscaler profiles or video modifications for your more unique hardware?
Absolutely. So Mike actually edited the firmware for the Donkey Kong machine. So we use a RetroTink 5X inside of there. I couldn't quite get it scaled because it's a weird format. It's used as a pixel wall rather than a standard display. He was kind enough to edit the firmware and let me do everything I need to do. So I always try to give him a shout out. I forgot today. So absolutely. I am in those communities. I'm around those communities. They do amazing work. I want to find ways of paying them so that they can continue to do their work. That's a long-term goal. Yeah.
Yes, so for some purely online formats like Java applets.
Yep.
You guys preserve those too?
As much as we can, absolutely. There's always that resistance. You don't want to just be repeating the work of what other people are doing. So like I acknowledge the work of Flashpoint, who's created that amazing Flash archive. But that said, there are things that we've tried to collect around that. Often for more independent developers, more coming from the developers rather than going to, old internet sites to try to get those. And unfortunately, COVID shut this down, but we had announced a deal with Congregate as they were transitioning to HTML5 to preserve all their work. Unfortunately, COVID meant people left on their end, so we weren't able to do that. But all that stuff, and then all the online connected games, all that stuff is really important.
We got time for, I believe, one more.
Back and back, all right.
Do you guys focus also on international games, not just English-speaking games? And if so, do you do a lot of translation?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we do call ourselves the International Center for the History of Electronic Games. So we do collect internationally, particularly in the video game space. We have an amazing collection of Japanese video games, between 7,000 and 9,000 Japanese games, complete collections of all Nintendo home consoles, so home console, not handhelds, from Famicom through the GameCube, including the disk drive systems that only came out of Japan. All Sega home consoles, which I think includes Game Gear, but I haven't verified that all of them are there. Again, the Japanese versions, from, whatever, going back to the SB1000 through the Dreamcast, and then all NEC, so PC Engine and all those derivatives, all of those games. So my fellow curator, Lindsay Carano, has been with the museum for a few years, and she has picked up on a project from the previous curator, Shannon, who again, I loved it, and I miss her as well. But they have spoken Japanese. Lindsay lived in Japan for almost a decade, is married to somebody from Japan, so she is not only good at Japanese, she is fluent at Japanese. So she's the one that handles a lot of that cataloging. But then I point to other countries. It's not just, to touch on the Japanese thing, we have researchers from Japan come to use the collection at the Strong because it's more accessible. Because Japan has a lot of different laws. We actually had a politician, the creator of the Love Hina manga, come to the museum to benchmark us as the leader in video game preservation. But then there's all those other countries. I would love more representation of, the other languages that are out there. You saw some of the Broderbund stuff and some of the Blizzard stuff. All those languages are important. Increasingly, we're talking to China. I have people that I talk to in the Netherlands, all those places. But one of the biggest challenges is not only do I not speak the language, but I don't even understand the game culture because none of it has been published in English. So I really, connect with them and would say in the games last year, some of them came to tell me what is it that we should be preserving that are, important for that video game history, but also to encourage them to do it themselves. Nobody's going to be able to tell the story of the Netherlands better than somebody who lived through it. Same goes for like Russia, all the Soviet era games, completely different than what we dealt with. Those are all things I'd love to have, but realizing the difficulties, especially getting something out of Russia, what can I do to encourage them to do it? Because yeah, there's only one strong, but again, you don't need to be the strong. You can do your thing. Let's support each other. And so building that community of, the few of us that are lucky to get paid to do this work, that's something that's always on my mind.
All right, well, that's it. Thank you.
Hey, look, sorry for the big ones out one, they're pretty good. If you look at an old Twitter post before Twitter became what it is now, you can find that Atari video, and it's really, really funny because they have like dancers singing a Broadway tune. So it's really cool.
No, thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. Don't forget to follow State Game Symposium tomorrow.